Look beneath the tallest tomato or pepper plant in your container garden. You may see a wide circle of soil that appears empty, cool, and almost wasted. It is tempting to look at that space and imagine one more crop growing there, one more bowl of greens, one more handful of herbs, or even a few roots waiting beneath the surface. And sometimes that is exactly what the space can become. But there is one important truth to understand before a single seed goes into the pot. The soil may look empty, but the root zone is not. A mature tomato or pepper does not keep its roots politely tucked beneath the stem. Those roots travel outward, downward, and across the container, searching for water, oxygen, and nutrients. The plant above the soil may occupy the center, but the plant below the soil is already using much more of the pot than you can see. That is why planting underneath a taller crop can produce two useful harvest layers, or it can create a crowded container where every plant struggles. The difference is not luck. It comes down to choosing the right lower crop, placing it correctly, matching its needs to the main plant, and harvesting it before cooperation turns into competition. In this video, we are going to look closely at 15 edible crops that can sometimes grow beneath tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, or other tall container plants. Some are excellent beginner choices. Some work only during cooler weather. Some are useful because they can be harvested quickly. Others look perfect at first, but need more caution than most gardeners realize. By the end, you will not only know which crops to try, you will know how to judge whether your own container has enough light, enough soil, enough moisture, and enough time to support a second harvest layer without weakening the first. Before choosing any crop, begin with the light. Do not decide that a space is shaded after looking at it once. The lower part of a container can receive direct morning sun, filtered light at midday, and deep shade in the afternoon. Another container may be bright early in the season, then become darker as the main plant produces more leaves. A balcony railing, nearby wall, roof overhang, or neighboring container can change the pattern again. The light beneath the tomato in May may be very different from the light beneath the same plant in July. Watch the container at several points during the day. Look at it in the morning, around midday, and later in the afternoon. You are not trying to measure light with perfect scientific precision. You are simply asking whether the lower crop will receive useful brightness for part of the day, or whether it will remain in dim shade almost all the time. Leafy greens can often tolerate less light than fruiting crops, but tolerance is not the same as preference. A lettuce plant may stay alive in deep shade while becoming loose, pale, and stretched. Parsley may continue producing leaves, but at a slower rate. A strawberry plant may remain green while producing few flowers. Survival alone is not the goal. The goal is a harvest worth the space and water the plant uses. The second condition is container volume. A large pot with a young tomato may appear to offer plenty of room, but that room is temporary. As the tomato grows, its demand for water and root space rises quickly. The smaller the pot, the shorter the window for an underplant. If the main crop is already too large for its container, adding anything else is usually the wrong move. A plant that wilts soon after watering, dries the pot rapidly, or has roots packed around the drainage holes is already telling you that the container is full. The safest lower crops are usually planted near the outer edge, not pressed against the main stem. Leaving open space around the stem makes watering easier, improves airflow, and reduces the chance of keeping the stem constantly damp. It also allows you to remove the lower crop later without digging directly through the most sensitive area around the main plant. Think of the outer portion of the pot as a temporary growing ring. You are borrowing that ring while the taller crop is still expanding into it. The third condition is water compatibility. A tomato in warm weather can be extremely thirsty. Leaf lettuce, spinach, parsley, and cilantro also prefer reasonably steady moisture. That does not mean they all need identical care, but they can often share a similar watering rhythm for a limited period. Thyme and oregano are different. They generally prefer brighter conditions and a mix that drains freely. If the entire container must stay consistently moist to support lettuce and a fruiting tomato, thyme may become weak or prone to problems. A plant can be small, low, and visually perfect while still being a poor partner because its roots want a different environment. This is where many companion planting lists become too simple. They group plants by height or by reputation without asking whether those plants can live under the same watering schedule. In a garden bed, roots may spread into different soil zones. In a container, every plant shares the same limited reservoir. When you water for one, you water for all. If one crop repeatedly suffers under that schedule, the combination is not truly compatible. The fourth condition is time. This may be the most useful idea in the entire system. The best lower crop is not always the crop that tolerates the most shade. It is often the crop you can harvest before the container becomes crowded. A young tomato leaves more light and open soil around its base than a mature tomato. That creates a temporary planting window. Fast greens can use that window, give you a small harvest, and leave before the main crop reaches peak demand. This means underplanting is often closer to succession planting than permanent companion planting. You are not asking two mature crops to share the same pot forever. You are allowing a quick or compact crop to use the space briefly. Then you harvest it, thin it, or move it before it begins to cost the main plant more than it gives you. With those 4 filters in place, we can begin with the easiest group, leafy crops. These are often the best place for beginners because their harvest is above the soil. Many can be picked young, and several respond well to the cooler conditions created by afternoon shade. But even within this group, each crop behaves differently. Leaf lettuce is usually the safest place to start. It has a relatively modest root system. When grown for loose leaves, it can be harvested before forming a large head, and it responds well to repeated picking. Instead of planting a thick ring around the entire container, place a few plants or small clusters near the outer edge. Choose positions where they still receive bright light for part of the day. As the leaves grow, harvest the outer ones first. This keeps each plant smaller and prevents it from forming a dense mass against the soil surface. The real advantage of leaf lettuce is flexibility. You do not need to wait for a perfect head. You can harvest young leaves when the tomato begins to cast heavier shade, when the weather turns hotter, or when the container starts drying too quickly. That ability to leave early makes lettuce more useful than its shade tolerance alone. It gives you control. In warm conditions, a little afternoon shade can help lettuce stay cooler than it would in an exposed pot. But do not confuse reduced heat with darkness. If the leaves become pale, thin, unusually long, or tilted strongly toward the edge of the container, the plant is asking for more light. Harvest it rather than waiting for quality to decline further. The lower layer should be useful, not merely alive. Spinach can also benefit from protection during warm afternoons, but it is more dependent on season and temperature. It is a cool weather crop. When conditions are mild, a young tomato or pepper can provide enough shelter to reduce heat stress while still allowing useful light. When the container becomes hot for long periods, spinach may bolt, slow down, or produce smaller leaves, even if it is shaded. The shade may delay stress, but it cannot turn hot weather into cool weather. That makes spinach a good crop for a short transition window. You might sow it while the main plant is still young and temperatures are moderate, then harvest it before summer heat and root competition intensify. The mistake is expecting spinach to remain productive under a large tomato through the hottest part of the season simply because the soil surface looks shaded. The air, container wall, and root zone may still be very warm. If spinach begins sending up a central stalk, producing narrower leaves, or changing texture, the useful window is closing. Harvest what remains. The goal is not to prove that the crop can survive. The goal is to take a worthwhile harvest and exit before the plant becomes poor quality or burdens the container. Arugula works for a different reason. It grows quickly, responds well to baby leaf harvesting, and can produce useful greens before the main crop fills the space. A few arugula plants near the edge of a large container can be cut young, sometimes more than once, depending on conditions. Its fast growth makes it a good example of why timing matters more than permanent compatibility. Arugula can tolerate some shade, but its flavor, texture, and growth rate change with heat and light. In hot conditions, the leaves may become stronger in flavor, and the plant may bolt Partial shade can slow that process, but it will not stop it indefinitely. For underplanting, think small and early. Harvest the leaves while they are tender. Do not wait for a large, mature plant beneath a tomato that is also rapidly expanding. The danger with arugula is not usually a massive root system. It is allowing too many seedlings to remain because they look harmless when small. A dense patch quickly becomes a mat of leaves and roots that competes for moisture. Thin, early. A few productive plants are better than a crowded carpet. Baby kale changes the question again. Kale itself can become a large, long-lived crop, and a mature kale plant does not belong beneath a tomato or pepper in the same container. But baby kale is a different harvest goal. When grown only for young leaves, it can be treated as a short-term crop. Sow lightly, thin aggressively, and harvest before the plants begin building thick stems and broad, mature leaves. The phrase baby kale is important here. You are not using a special rule that makes kale permanently compact. You are choosing to end the crop at a younger stage. That decision keeps the root system and canopy smaller. It also gives you an exit point before the main plant requires the full container. Baby kale still needs useful light. If it stretches, leans, or develops soft, widely spaced leaves, the shade is too deep. In that case, harvest early. Do not compensate by adding extra fertilizer. More fertilizer cannot replace missing light, and it can create lush, weak growth while increasing the nutrient load in a container that already supports a fruiting plant. Bok choy may appear compact, especially when you choose a small variety or harvest it young, but its rosette shape can spread wider than expected. It occupies horizontal space close to the soil surface. That matters beneath a tomato or pepper, because dense lower leaves can reduce airflow and make watering more difficult. Place bok choy near the outer edge, with enough room for its leaves to open away from the main stem. Bok choy is often most useful when harvested as a small whole plant or as baby leaves. If you leave it to reach full size, the rosette can become a physical barrier around the base of the main crop. In humid conditions, crowded leaves can remain wet longer and create a more favorable environment for pests or disease. Watch the spacing above the soil as carefully as the spacing below it. This is the first major lesson from the leafy group. A plant can have a reasonably modest root system and still be a poor underplant if its leaves create a dense, humid layer. Compact does not always mean narrow. Low does not always mean unobtrusive. Shape matters. Now we move from crops harvested mainly above the soil to crops that must form part of their harvest inside the same root zone used by the main plant. This makes placement and timing even more important. Radishes are often recommended because they grow quickly. That is a real advantage, but speed does not remove the need for space. A radish must expand below the surface. If the soil near the edge of the pot is loose and relatively open, a small number of radishes may form well before the tomato roots dominate the area. If the root zone is already dense, the plants may produce leaves without forming satisfying roots. Place radishes close to the outer edge, where they receive better light and where removal will disturb the main plant less. Do not create a complete dense ring. A few well-spaced radishes are more realistic. As soon as they reach useful size, harvest them. Leaving them longer does not improve the partnership. It only extends competition. Light still matters. In deep shade, radish tops may grow while the roots remain small. The plant is not failing because radishes cannot ever tolerate partial shade. It is failing because the available energy is not enough for strong root development under those conditions. If the leaves stretch and the shoulders of the roots do not begin swelling, treat the greens as the harvest or remove the plants. Baby beets should also be approached with a clear harvest goal. Full-sized beets require more time and space than this system usually offers. Baby beets, beet greens, or a combination of small roots and leaves are more realistic. Sow very lightly and thin early. Crowded seedlings may look like efficient use of space, but every extra plant adds another root competing in the same small zone. Beet leaves are edible, which gives you flexibility. You can harvest a few outer leaves while allowing the root to continue, But do not strip the plant heavily if you still want a beet. The leaves power the root. In a shared container, it is often better to choose one main goal, either quick greens or a small root harvest. Trying to maximize both can keep the plant in the pot too long. Green onions are among the most visually efficient crops in the list. Their leaves grow upright, they fit near the edge, and they can be harvested in different ways. You can cut green tops, pull individual plants, or remove the entire group when the main crop needs more space. Because they do not form a broad canopy, they are less likely to smother the soil surface. But narrow leaves can be misleading. A dense circle of green onions still creates many roots. If you plant them shoulder to shoulder around a tomato, they can form a thick network exactly where water enters the outer part of the pot. Keep the group small and leave gaps. The point is not to draw a perfect green border. The point is to gain a useful harvest with limited competition. Green onions are especially practical because they have a clear exit. Pull a few at a time as the tomato grows. If the container begins drying faster or the tomato starts demanding more water, remove the remaining onions. Their upright shape makes them easy to access without disturbing the main canopy. Chives look similar from a distance, but they behave differently because they form persistent clumps and can remain for much longer. A small clump may work near the edge of a large pepper pot, especially if it is trimmed regularly. Over time, however, the clump thickens. What began as a few fine leaves can become a permanent root mass. That makes chives useful only when you are willing to manage their future. If the main crop is seasonal, you might later lift the chive clump and move it into its own pot. If you leave it year after year in the same container, it may become a stronger competitor than the quick annual crops we discussed earlier. Long life can be an advantage in a dedicated herb pot, but in an underplanting system, long life can also become a problem. The next group brings fragrance, repeated picking, and some of the most attractive combinations. It also introduces the strongest conflict in the list, herbs that do not want the same light and moisture. Parsley is one of the more dependable herbs for partial shade. It can produce useful leaves with less direct sun than many Mediterranean herbs, and it generally appreciates steady moisture. That makes it a reasonable partner for a tomato or pepper when the container is large enough and the parsley remains near the outer edge. Harvest the outer stems from the base, rather than repeatedly cutting only the top. This keeps the center growing and allows the plant to stay relatively compact. Do not let one parsley plant become a large permanent bush beneath the main crop. It can develop a substantial root over time. The safest use is as a managed, regularly harvested plant that may eventually be moved or removed. Parsley also benefits from being placed where it can lean slightly outward from the pot instead of inward toward the main stem. This uses the space beyond the rim and improves light exposure. Container gardening is not limited to the vertical space directly above the soil. Plants at the edge can use air space outside the pot, which reduces crowding inside it. Cilantro can be extremely useful when timing is right. In warm climates or warm seasons, afternoon shade may help keep the plant cooler and delay bolting. A young tomato or pepper can provide exactly that protection. But cilantro remains a short window crop. Once temperatures rise and the plant begins to bolt, the leafy harvest declines quickly. Treat cilantro as a temporary guest. Sow a small amount, harvest early, and accept that it may leave the container sooner than lettuce or parsley. Do not keep weak, flowering cilantro beneath a tomato simply because it is still green. If you want coriander seed, that becomes a different crop with a different space requirement. For a lower harvest layer, the main value is fresh leaves during the brief period when the plant is compact and productive. Now we reach thyme, one of the most tempting choices in the entire list. It stays low, it has small leaves, it looks perfect around the edge of a tomato pot. But height is only one of the 4 tests. Thyme generally prefers strong light, excellent drainage, and less consistently moist soil than many leafy greens. If your tomato needs frequent watering and the lower part of the pot remains damp, thyme may not thrive. Thyme can work in a very large, fast-draining container where the outer edge receives strong sun and dries more quickly. It may also work better beneath a pepper than beneath a very dense tomato, depending on canopy and watering, but it should not be presented as a universal shade herb. In many cases, the better solution is to place a small thyme pot beside the tomato container rather than forcing both plants to share soil. This is an important gardening habit. Do not confuse proximity with sharing a root zone. Two plants can be companions because their containers sit next to each other. They can create the same layered visual effect without competing directly for water. A separate herb pot can often give you better control than an overloaded mixed container. Oregano creates a similar issue, with the added tendency to spread. A small oregano plant may begin neatly, then send stems outward and form a broad mat. If it receives enough light, it can become vigorous. If it does not receive enough light, it may become thin and weak. Neither outcome automatically makes it a good underplant. If you use oregano in the same container, keep it at the brightest edge and trim it often. Watch for stems rooting where they touch the soil. Do not allow it to form a dense cover around the main stem. Like thyme, oregano may be more productive and easier to manage in a separate pot positioned beside the main container. The contrast within this herb group is useful. Parsley and cilantro often appreciate more consistent moisture. Thyme and oregano usually prefer brighter, drier conditions. Calling all four of them herbs does not make their needs the same. A successful combination is based on shared conditions, not shared labels. Strawberries offer the strongest visual payoff in the list. A strawberry plant near the edge of a large container can send leaves, flowers, and runners over the rim, creating a beautiful lower layer beneath tomatoes or peppers. The crown remains near the surface, the leaves occupy the outer edge, and the fruit can hang away from the soil. It is easy to understand why gardeners want this combination, but beauty and productivity are not always the same. Strawberries can tolerate some partial shade, yet flowering and fruiting generally improve with more light. A plant beneath a dense tomato may stay leafy while producing few berries. If you try strawberries, place them at the sunniest outer edge, where the leaves can reach beyond the canopy. Keep the crown at the correct level rather than burying it deeply, and control runners so they do not create additional plants throughout the container. Also consider the long-term plan. Strawberries are perennial in many situations. A tomato is usually seasonal. At the end of the tomato crop, you may want to move the strawberry, refresh the soil, or redesign the pot. That is possible, but it should be planned. A plant that remains longer than the main crop needs a future beyond the current combination. Sorrel is the final crop, and it is one of the better choices for lower light. Its leaves have a bright, tangy flavor, and the plant can often continue producing in partial shade. It can be harvested by removing outer leaves while allowing the center to grow. For a gardener who enjoys the flavor, a small sorrel plant can provide a distinctive harvest from a space where many sun-loving herbs would struggle. Yet sorrel introduces the opposite problem from radishes and arugula. It can remain productive for a long time. That persistence allows it to become larger and more established. A crop that survives well may eventually compete more than a quick crop that disappears after one harvest. Keep sorrel trimmed, watch the size of the crown, and be ready to move it when the main plant needs the full root zone. We now have 15 possibilities, but the safest way to begin is not choosing 5 of them. It is choosing one compatible lower crop, or at most a very small combination, and watching how the container responds. For a large tomato pot, one of the easiest combinations is leaf lettuce with a small group of green onions. Place the lettuce in 2 or 3 positions around the outer edge, rather than forming a complete circle. Put a few green onions in the brightest remaining gap. Harvest lettuce leaves regularly and pull the onions gradually as the tomato grows. This gives both lower crops a clear exit. For a pepper container, parsley and a small chive clump can work when the pot is generous and the edge receives useful light. Keep the parsley harvested. Trim the chives and prevent the clump from becoming permanent unless you plan to move it later. Pepper canopies are often less dense than large, indeterminate tomato canopies, which may allow better light below, but every plant and location is different. Observe the actual shade pattern. For a short, fast harvest while a tomato is still young, arugula and a few radishes can use the early window. This combination requires discipline. So harvest the arugula as baby leaves and pull the radishes as soon as they are ready. Do not wait until the tomato is large and fruiting heavily. The entire lower layer should be gone before the root zone becomes crowded. In cooler conditions, spinach and cilantro may share the lower zone beneath a young pepper or tomato. Both can benefit from protection during warmer afternoons, but both are temporary. As heat rises, harvest them. Their role is to use a brief, seasonal opportunity, not to remain all summer. The simplest combination may be the best: one main plant and one lower crop. Tomato with lettuce, pepper with parsley, tomato with green onions, pepper with baby kale, grown only for young leaves. This gives you enough information to learn how your specific pot behaves without creating a complicated problem. Before moving into the warning signs, it helps to imagine how this system changes through the life of the main plant. At the beginning, a tomato transplant may be only a foot tall, with a narrow canopy and a root system that has not yet occupied the full container. Light reaches almost every part of the soil. Moisture lasts longer because the plant is still small. This is the widest opportunity for a lower crop. A few weeks later, the tomato branches outward. New roots explore the pot. The leaves cast shifting patches of shade. The lower crop may still look good, but the balance is changing. By the time the tomato is flowering heavily and setting fruit, its demand has increased. The lower crop that was helpful in the beginning may now need to leave. The system is successful when you anticipate that transition instead of waiting for visible damage. Pepper plants often create a different pattern. Many peppers develop a more open canopy, allowing light to reach the soil between branches. Their root demand can still be substantial, especially when they carry many fruits, but the lower layer may receive brighter light for longer. That can make parsley, green onions, or baby greens more practical beneath some peppers than beneath a dense tomato. Still, a small pepper pot can become crowded just as quickly as any other container. The plant species does not replace the need to judge the actual pot. Eggplants can create broad leaves that cast deep, dramatic shade. The space beneath them may remain cooler, which sounds useful, but those leaves can block more light than expected. A small leafy crop may work early, then decline as the eggplant canopy expands. Eggplant also becomes thirsty in hot weather. In this situation, a quick crop with an early exit is usually more sensible than a perennial herb. The shape of the container changes the opportunity as well. A wide pot creates more edge space than a tall, narrow pot with the same approximate volume. A grow bag may dry more quickly around the sides, which can stress shallow lower crops. A glazed pot may retain moisture longer. A dark container in full sun may heat the root zone even when the foliage below is shaded. Underplanting is not only about the plants. It is about the microclimate created by the entire container. When preparing the planting ring, avoid digging deeply through an established root system. If the main plant is already growing, make small planting pockets near the edge rather than turning over the whole surface. For tiny seeds, loosen only the upper layer gently. For transplants, use small young plants with compact root balls. Forcing a large transplant into the pot can cut roots and immediately create more competition than the system can support. If you are planning the combination from the beginning, you have more control. You can place the main transplant slightly off-center while still giving it adequate room, leaving a brighter outer zone for one lower crop. You can choose a wide container, use a loose, well-draining mix, and install support for the tomato before adding small plants. Planning early reduces the need to disturb roots later. But even when the main plant is already established, you can still make a cautious decision. Begin with a crop that can be direct sown shallowly, such as lettuce, arugula, or radish. Sow fewer seeds than you think you need. Germination is not permission to keep every seedling. Thin the extras while they are small, and use edible thinnings when appropriate. For leaf lettuce, consider the growth habit. Loose leaf varieties are easier to manage than large heading types. The purpose of the lower layer is repeated small harvests or a quick cut, not a perfect full head. If you choose a variety that naturally forms a broad, dense head, you increase the time and space required. The crop name matters, but the harvest style matters just as much. When harvesting lettuce, Remove clean outer leaves without damaging the center, or cut the entire plant when the main crop needs the room. Do not allow old, damaged leaves to remain pressed against damp soil. They can trap moisture and hide slugs, insects, or decay. A productive lower layer should be actively managed, not left as decoration. For spinach, air movement is particularly important in cool, damp conditions. A dense patch beneath a canopy can remain wet after watering. Sow lightly, water the soil rather than repeatedly wetting the leaves, and harvest plants before they overlap heavily. If the location is cool but stagnant, fewer plants may perform better than a thick stand. Arugula gives you a chance to use succession even within the underplanting window. Rather than sowing one dense patch, sow a small amount, harvest it young, and decide whether there is enough time and light for another small sowing. The answer may be yes, early in the season, and no later. This turns the container into a changing system rather than a fixed arrangement. Baby kale benefits from the same restraint. A few young plants can provide leaves. A crowded mass will quickly become tough to manage. If flea beetles or caterpillars are common in your area, inspect the lower leaves carefully. The main canopy can hide damage. Underplanting should not create a protected feeding zone for pests that you never see. Bok choy also deserves close inspection because the center of the rosette can collect debris and moisture. In a humid container, spacing is essential. If a plant begins to bolt, harvest it. If outer leaves touch the main stem or block watering access, remove them. A lower crop earns its place by remaining useful and manageable. Radishes reveal a simple truth about roots. The top of the plant cannot tell you everything. Healthy leaves do not guarantee a good radish. Gently check whether the root shoulder is swelling near the surface. If several weeks pass and only leaves develop, the combination may lack light, space, or suitable temperature. Continuing to wait often extends competition without improving the harvest. When you pull a radish, hold the soil around it gently if the main plant is nearby. Do not yank a dense cluster and disturb a large section of the pot. This is another reason to plant near the edge and avoid crowded rings. Easy removal is part of good design. With baby beets, thinning is not optional. Beet seeds often produce more than one seedling from a cluster, so what looks like a single sowing point may become several plants. Separate or thin them early. If you leave every seedling, the roots compete with one another before they even compete with the tomato. Green onions can be started from seed or small transplants, but avoid pushing large grocery store bunches into the pot as a dense block. A few separated plants are easier to manage. If you regrow onion bases, remember that regrowth still requires light and nutrients. The fact that a plant began from kitchen scraps does not make its demands disappear. Chives can flower, and those flowers may be attractive and useful to pollinators. But flowering also increases the size and duration of the plant in the shared container. If your goal is a compact, edible lower layer, trim the clump and harvest regularly. If your goal is flowers and a perennial herb, a separate pot may be the better long-term home. Parsley is slow to establish from seed, so a small transplant may be practical. Choose one that is not root-bound. Tease the outer roots only if necessary, and plant it near the edge without burying the crown. Once established, parsley can become stronger than expected. Its taproot and long season mean it deserves a removal plan, just like sorrel and strawberries. Cilantro is often more successful when sown directly because it dislikes root disturbance. Scatter only a few seeds in a defined patch rather than across the entire pot. This keeps the crop easy to remove. When the stems begin elongating rapidly, harvest the leaves and clear the patch. The empty space can then be mulched rather than immediately replanted. Thyme and oregano should be judged honestly after watering. If the soil where they sit remains wet for a long time, the combination is wrong, even if the plants look fine for the first week. Roots often decline before the leaves show obvious symptoms. A separate, small terracotta pot, placed beside the main container, can provide the drier root zone these herbs prefer, while preserving the same visual layering. For strawberries, inspect the crown and the fruiting pattern. If the plant produces many leaves and runners, but very few flowers, It may be receiving too little light or too much nitrogen. Do not keep feeding it in hopes that more leaves will become more fruit. Move it to a brighter position if possible. The strawberry should not remain only because it makes the container look lush. Sorrel should be harvested with purpose. Use the young leaves, keep the center open, and prevent the plant from dominating the rim. Its flavor is distinctive, so one small plant may be enough. There is no advantage in allowing a large sorrel crown to occupy space that could support the main crop more effectively. Temperature deserves its own attention because shade can be deceptive. The leaves beneath a tomato may feel cool while the potting mix remains hot. Dark plastic, reflected heat from a wall, and afternoon sun on the container side can raise root zone temperature. Spinach and cilantro may struggle even though their leaves are not in direct sun. Touch the container, check the soil moisture, and consider the heat around the pot, not only the shadow above it. In contrast, a container in cool weather may stay wet much longer beneath a dense canopy. The same planting that required daily watering in summer may need much less water later. If you follow a fixed schedule rather than checking the soil, lower plants can suffer from excess moisture. Water according to conditions, not habit. A simple moisture check can be done by feeling the mix below the surface at more than one point. The outer edge may be dry while the center remains moist, or the reverse may happen depending on root density and watering method. Check where the lower crop is growing and where the main roots are active. This gives you a better picture than touching only the top layer. Water slowly enough that the entire root zone receives moisture. A crowded surface can channel water down one side, leaving other areas dry. If foliage blocks access, that is a sign the lower layer may already be too dense. You should be able to water the pot thoroughly without fighting through a wall of leaves. Feeding also requires balance. Fruiting tomatoes and peppers need steady nutrition, but adding a leafy crop changes demand. The answer is not automatically more fertilizer. Begin with a good container mix and feed the main crop according to its needs. Observe leaf color and growth. If the lower crop makes the pot difficult to manage, reduce the lower crop before increasing fertilizer. Too much nitrogen can encourage excessive leafy growth in both layers. The tomato may produce a dense canopy that creates more shade, while the lower greens become soft and crowded. This accelerates the very problem underplanting was supposed to solve. Balanced growth is more valuable than maximum leaf volume. Mulch can be used between small lower plants, but keep it light. Balanced growth is more valuable than maximum leaf volume. Mulch can be used between small lower plants, but keep it light and away from stems and crowns. A thick layer packed around lettuce, strawberry crowns, or the main stem can retain too much moisture. Once the lower crop is harvested, mulch can take over its role by covering the soil's surface without adding root demand. Airflow is another invisible resource. A tomato canopy above and a dense leafy layer below can create a pocket where humid air remains trapped. This is especially important in climates with frequent rain or high humidity. Keep lower leaves off the main stem, remove damaged foliage, and avoid filling every gap. Open soil is not always wasted soil. Sometimes it is an airflow corridor. As you test any combination, watch the main plant first. A second harvest is valuable only if it does not quietly reduce the first. If the tomato begins wilting much sooner than before, if the pepper stops growing vigorously, or if the pot dries unusually fast, reduce the lower layer. Do not wait for severe stress. Watch the lower plants too. Pale, stretched leaves mean the light is too weak. Slow growth may mean shade, root competition, temperature stress, or all three. Constantly wet lower foliage may signal poor airflow. A dense tangle at the soil surface may make it difficult to water evenly or inspect the stem. One of the most common mistakes is planting too close to the main stem. Keep a clear area around it. This reduces moisture against the stem, leaves room for air, and makes it easier to remove the lower crop without damaging the main roots. The exact open area will vary with pot size and plant size, but the principle remains the same. Do not crowd the stem. Another mistake is treating an attractive full container as proof of success. A pot can look lush for several weeks, while competition builds below the soil. The first sign may be faster drying. The next may be smaller leaves, slower growth, or more frequent wilting. By the time everything looks crowded above ground, the roots may already be competing heavily. Do not respond to every sign of crowding by adding fertilizer. Fertilizer cannot create more root space, more light, or more water-holding capacity. In fact, extra nitrogen can push soft leafy growth at the exact time the container needs less demand. When the pot is overloaded, the first solution is usually to remove plants, not feed them harder. Do not evaluate shade only once. The sun angle changes through the season, the main canopy expands, a nearby plant may grow. What was bright in early summer can become dim later. Continue observing. A lower crop that worked well for 3 weeks may need to be harvested because the environment has changed. Do not combine plants with opposite moisture needs, and assume careful watering will solve everything. In a shared container, water spreads through the mix. You may be able to favor one edge slightly, especially in a large pot, but you cannot create 2 completely separate climates in the same root zone. If thyme repeatedly suffers while lettuce and tomato are happy, thyme belongs elsewhere. Most importantly, give every lower crop an exit plan before planting. Will you harvest it as baby leaves? Pull it when the main canopy closes? Move it into another pot? Remove it at the first sign of water stress? A plant without an exit plan tends to remain too long because it still looks alive. That is how temporary cooperation becomes permanent competition. There are also situations where you should not underplant at all. If the main crop is already yellowing, stunted, root-bound, or recovering from stress, leave it alone. If the pot is small, the drainage is poor, or the soil remains wet for long periods, another plant will make management harder. If the lower area receives deep shade nearly all day, mulch may serve the container better than another edible crop. Mulch is not wasted space. A thin, appropriate layer can reduce moisture loss, soften temperature swings, and protect the soil surface without adding root competition. Sometimes, the most productive choice is not another harvest. It is protecting the plant already carrying flowers and fruit. You should also avoid underplanting when pests or disease make dense foliage risky. If the main crop already has poor airflow, lower leaves touching the soil, or recurring fungal problems, adding another canopy at the base can make conditions worse. Solve the health problem first. Productivity begins with a stable main plant. So how do you put all of this into action without making the process complicated? Start with 5 simple steps. First, observe the light beneath the main crop at several times during the day. Decide whether the outer edge is bright, partially shaded, or deeply shaded. Second, judge the container honestly. Is it large enough for the main plant? Does it stay evenly moist? Or does it dry too quickly already? Is the main plant vigorous? If the answer is no, stop there. Third, choose one lower crop with a compatible watering rhythm. For most beginners, leaf lettuce, parsley, green onions, or a small amount of arugula are easier starting points than thyme, oregano, strawberries, or long-lived sorrel. Fourth, plant lightly near the outer edge and keep the area around the main stem open. Do not aim for a complete living carpet. Fifth, decide the harvest date or removal signal in advance. You might harvest lettuce when the tomato canopy reaches the pot edge. Pull radishes as soon as the roots swell. Remove cilantro when it begins bolting, or move chives before the clump expands. Then watch the container rather than the promise printed on a seed packet. Your climate, pot size, plant variety, sunlight, and watering habits determine what works. A combination that succeeds on a cool balcony may fail on a hot patio. A large container may support a lower crop that a small grow bag cannot. Observation is more valuable than a universal rule. The final goal is not to fill every visible inch of soil. It is to give one carefully chosen lower crop a useful place, a clear purpose, and a harvest date before competition begins. When that happens, a tomato can produce above, while lettuce gives leaves below. A pepper can carry fruit, while parsley grows at the edge. A young container can offer a quick crop before the main plant takes over. That is what 1 pot and 2 harvests should mean. Not twice the guaranteed yield, not the maximum number of plants forced into one container. It means two distinct, well-timed layers of food from the same footprint, with the main crop protected and the lower crop managed. Use the shade, but do not worship it. Respect the roots you cannot see. Match the water needs. Keep the stem open. Harvest early. And let the health of the main plant tell you how much space is truly available. Do that, and the quiet circle of soil beneath a taller crop can become one of the smartest, most productive spaces in your container garden.